Hey, Savannah, welcome to the show.
Hi, Shannon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I'm so excited to chat with you because we have two expats basically right here that live abroad. And I'm excited to unpack all of those things related to expatriating, related to maybe having a home abroad, bringing those perspectives to the table. Would you mind telling folks that are listening right now what you do and where you live?
Yeah, so my name is Savannah Chaffin. I'm an enrolled agent currently based in Vienna, Austria. I have my own tax firm, which is named Alveus Tax, and I help US citizens living abroad who live primarily in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, but throughout Europe as well. And then I also have another company, or I'm a co founder of named Passport to Wealth, and we just launched a podcast where we kind of go through everything expat related. So yeah.
That is super cool. I have to tune into that. So let's hear about your story because everybody has a really unique and interesting story on how they fell in love with maybe another country, another culture, and decided to leave the US. What's yours?
Yeah, so my junior year of college, I got a scholarship to study abroad. I didn't even have a passport at the time, so I bought my first passport, kind of jumped on a plane and landed in Munich. I traveled a lot, really fell in love with it, and then decided after I graduate that I wanted to live abroad. So I kind of made that happen, went back to the US, finished my studies, and then just decided to move to Berlin. So just kind of dove into that.
Yeah, and did you have any anticipation that you might do that? Like when did you kind of make that decision and make that decision, I guess, so quickly? I feel like almost everyone I talk to is they make these like it's typically not like a 2 or 3 year process of contemplation. It's usually like, no, I'm coming home, packing my bags, and I think I want to move here. Most commonly, what was that like for you in terms of how soon did you realize that? Was there any particular moment when you just said, yeah, I think I want to live here?
Yeah, so when I was studying in Munich, I met a guy, of course. That's like a lot of expats have this story that they move for love. So that was a part of it. And plus, I didn't have the best, I guess, family growing up. So that was also a motivating factor, kind of running away from the US, so to say. So that all played into it. But as for planning, I honestly didn't do too much planning. Not that I would suggest that to everyone. A little more planning would have been a positive thing in my case. But yeah, it just kind of made it happen. Moved to Berlin after I graduated. So
Did you consider any of like the tax implications of that? Because I know you're a tax expert now. You know, I know you were probably still in your studies or just had finished. So talk to me about how that weighed in. Like, did you look into those things? Did you study them? Yeah, you're shaking your head. Nope.
absolutely, absolutely not. So it's funny. Okay, let's go back a little bit. So when I first started at university, I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. So I was studying, yeah, I was like
So
in bio. And I quickly discovered that, oh, I would have to go to medical school and I can't really afford that. So I was like looking into finance and I ended up in finance because if you're working in finance, you can't be poor, right? So it's kind of how I in finance. And I actually hated accounting in school. So I was like, I'll work in finance, but I never want to work in tax. So it's kind of funny that I ended up here. But no, so to say, I did not know anything about tax, didn't know that even when I was living abroad, I had to file a tax return. For everyone out there, the US has citizenship based taxation as opposed to residence based taxation. So no matter where you live in the world, Uncle Sam wants his cut, basically. Um,
yes, they don't make
yeah.
that easy.
Yeah. So no, didn't know anything about it, but definitely learned a lot after I moved. That's kind of how I ended up here.
Yeah. And, I know a lot of people are, they look into other countries too, thinking that's a way to avoid US taxation. And as you just put it, it's really hard what are the sort of parameters that and this is selfish, by the way, guys, listening to this. I'm learning a lot from Savannah as we speak because I haven't done a ton of research on this, even though I live in Costa Rica. I know I'm guilty. We don't have residency yet in Costa Rica. We are still US citizens with all of the same obligations as anyone who's living in the US. So I want to hear more about what actually makes that change. What are some of the triggers where your taxes will change?
Yes. So if you earn any sort of foreign income, that would be reportable on your US tax return. So that's if you have an employer abroad and they pay you, or if you take up self-employment when you're living abroad and they pay you, all of that is reportable on your US tax return. It doesn't matter if the income is US based or foreign based, it's taxed kind of in the same way. There are some expat tax benefits that there are different like thresholds that you have to meet to really qualify to use those. So you're not necessarily getting double taxed. That's when a lot of clients come to me and they're like, I'm living abroad, paying a taxes in, let's say, Germany. How do I not pay double tax in the US? And there are some benefits there to kind of avoid that.
Yeah. So, for example, I have a Costa Rican business. We were able to put our property in that business. We don't make a ton of rental income. We've only rented a house out once, where we've lived in it. We were planning on renting it, but we ended up living in it. But we have a lot of expenses, and then on our business return for Costa Rica, we have a ton of expenses. So, likewise, can you take deductions like you would in the U.S.? Like, can you transfer those over and say, I have a business with a loss over here? Can you? I mean, I kind of know where this is going, but like you can't really double claim the loss, right?
Yes, so you report it pretty much in the exact same way. So in your example, right, if it's a business and you're reporting it via Schedule C as you would in the US, it would be the same thing when you're living abroad. It would also be just like Schedule C income. If you have a loss, you can claim that like you would any kind of other income on your return. There are some other considerations. If you have rentals abroad, like you're saying, some of them can be treated as like foreign disregarded entities, which can be a little bit complex.
Mm.
So yeah, there's that.
It's so
Everything when you put international stuff in the mix becomes a bit more complex.
Yeah, because everybody has different rules, right? And the US, and frankly, the US hasn't made it super clear what their expectations are and how they share information, right? For someone who's thinking, okay, I might be interested in moving abroad and doing what these guys did, you know, how because it's one of those things where this is what I've struggled with is the US doesn't know what it doesn't know. And if we forget that we have a bank account abroad because we're going back and forth, or we forget to report something, it's like it's totally innocent because we're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. I didn't think about that as like part of my same life over here, my US life and my Costa Rica life. So I find myself constantly struggling with like, oh yeah, I probably should report that. Not in malicious intention, but just because it's so out of sight, out of mind. And there's nothing really prompting us in the US tax system that's like, by the way, do you have any foreign assets, foreign this, like, property? It's hard to remember to do that because I feel like it is so uncommon and unexpected.
Yeah, there is definitely a bit of gray area there. And it's also, we have a lot of clients come to us who are like, I missed X bank account when reporting on your FBAR, which that's something else if you live abroad. If you have any foreign accounts, you might have FBAR or Form 8938 reporting. And kind of what that is the FBAR is if you have an aggregate value over $10,000 in your foreign accounts, then you have to basically report this informational return to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, which sounds so scary, um, but yeah, so you have to report all your foreign accounts and then something similar to the IRS. So yeah, there is a bit of gray area there, and it's not an easy answer. Like, should you go through and amend everything if you forget one account? There's no really easy answer there. If you've been living abroad for a few years, you can look into something called the Streamline program, which is something that's offered, Streamline for an offshore program, something offered to expats who may be living abroad or accidental Americans or something of the sort. And that really protects you from any penalties that the IRS can charge. And that's 3 years of back tax returns, 6 years back FBARs. So that is an option there. Um,
Really interesting. Yeah. And, for those listening who are thinking, well, I've been exploring the idea of moving to another country. This feels like a lot of stuff. Like this is it must feel like, am I taking out another mortgage in terms of paperwork? This is a lot of stuff to keep in mind. Let's talk about, let's dispel that, there's a lot involved and a lot of preparation to move abroad. I get this question a lot, like, how was that process? What did you do? How did you do it? And I don't know about you, but my answer is buy a plane ticket.
exactly. I honestly hopped on a plane and didn't make too many preparations. I don't necessarily suggest that to people. There are some steps you can take to make your life a lot easier than kind of me in that situation. Um, yeah, but I also didn't plan much, just kind of hopped on a plane. But I guess some of those steps
Yeah,
that you can. Sorry,
yeah,
go
but I think
ahead.
like we didn't plan on living here either. We planned on coming to visit for a vacation. We stayed for like 8 months, and then it was like, oops, I guess we live here now over the course of the last 4 years. So yeah, I think that people don't realize how not easy, I should say, but how simple it can be as a decision to do that, and that there are a lot of things to keep in mind. I think it's more about being aware that there are probably things you don't know, and that there are things that reporting requirements, then you should hire someone like Savannah to help you understand exactly what that looks like. Someone who's been there and who knows the ins and outs of both countries. That is hard to find because there's so many nuances, I'm sure, in German and Austrian and Swiss that, and like here, there are so many things that make no sense to us in terms of
Hmm.
how taxes are done. So I think let's talk about, what should people do and how can they simplify this for themselves if they want to make that decision?
Yeah. First off, let's go before you move. If you're actually looking to plan the move and be more responsible than just hopping on a plane, um, first I would suggest really working on like consolidating any existing accounts. So a lot of the times when you're working in the US, you might have a 401k through this employer, 401k here, an IRA, other, various accounts. So working on consolidating those accounts can be really important. And also making sure you're working kind of with a financial institution that works with people who are abroad. Um, because a lot of them don't work with you when you're abroad and they realize you don't have a US address. They might close some of your accounts, force you to move your assets. So that's something we really suggest ahead of time. And then looking into kind of opening your foreign bank accounts. So with the FBAR reporting, a lot of foreign institutions don't like working with US citizens. So it can be kind of hard to open foreign accounts, especially accounts that are interest bearing or anything like that. So, kind of looking into that ahead of time, there are some online options that we usually suggest there. So, that's kind of before the move. And then once you actually land in your resident country, especially if you live in a country that charges income tax, we suggest finding a local tax preparer and specifically someone who's familiar with the US if possible. Because we were talking about like 401ks, Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, those all have different tax treatments in your resident country, which is something that you really need to consider.
Yeah. And the other thing too is understanding how they can, even if you understand from listening to this show a little bit about the US tax system, the other countries, you have to like throw all of the rules out the window sometimes and kind of hit a reset button in your brain to understand how their tax system works and realize that it's not the same as the US and change your expectations, right? So when I talk to lawyers and accountants here, I said I want someone who understands the US tax system so they can tell me what's different. They can really enhance for me. This is different than what you're used to. Let me explain it. And as
Mhm.
opposed to me making assumptions because I don't know any differently, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's why we always suggest, if possible, finding someone familiar with US tax preparation. We don't really find those unicorns very often who do the local tax preparation and US tax preparation at the same time, because being familiar with that many jurisdictions can be pretty difficult. But as I
Yeah.
mentioned, the learning in your resident country, kind of how they treat US items, it's also really important to know how, like in your host country where you're living, how those items are also treated on your US tax return. So we see that a lot with foreign pensions, and these can be a really great resource, right, for people living in the country or who are from, say, you're moving to Germany, who are from there. They can be a really great option, but how it's actually treated on the US side can become complex because a lot of people jump to the assumption that it's treated like a 401k or a Roth IRA, but in reality it's not like that. And they can, depending on the kind of foreign pension, they can have a lot of foreign investments, which are treated as PFICs, which can be a little bit scary for US citizens. So it's really important to kind of understand how those items will be treated as well on the US side. So,
And what are some of the things that you've seen with your clients in particular? Because now you help other people navigate this process. What are some of the things that you would recommend people do to avoid common mistakes or common issues that end up creating more delays or creating more financial burden on your clients? Like, what are some of the core things that you see?
yeah, first and foremost is avoid foreign investments for the most part. If they're any sort of like mutual fund or anything like that, or yeah, any sort of mutual funds, basically, those can be treated, as I mentioned before, as PFICs, which are passive foreign investment companies, and they're number one, treated really punitively in the US. And number two, the reporting requirements for those can be pretty hefty. So stay away from foreign investments kind of wherever possible. Next would be find, even if you're looking like a US tax repair, I wouldn't find someone who's necessarily just does international work, but finding someone and you're familiar with your specific country is really important as well. Um, yeah. And then there's also complexity when it comes to any foreign corporations. So if you're looking to incorporate a company or something when you're living abroad, you got to be careful there. Or if you marry someone who has a foreign company, there also can be reporting requirements for you as a US citizen. So yeah, all of that becomes a bit complex.
Yeah, I'll add to that one thing we didn't realize and we heard through friends and family and our lawyers, and we luckily did this, but was a foreign will and like plans. So even though it's not necessarily financial tax related, we learned that it's really that they wouldn't honor our will that we had in the US. So you needed a Costa Rican will. Otherwise, they distribute your property, your money in your bank account, your real estate here, accordance with their law. And which makes total sense. But I was like, oh, I guess that, just having a will in the US doesn't translate to Costa Rican law, smack my head and go, duh, Shannon. But also, like, I didn't think about that, right?
I think that also depends on where the majority of your assets are located. So if the majority of your
Right.
assets are still located stateside, then a US will is usually fine, even if you're living in a foreign country. But say you start owning real estate in the foreign country, that's one thing that we really see like a switch. Okay, well, you definitely need a foreign will now. It also depends on how long you plan on staying there. If you're moving abroad on an expat assignment and you're just planning on staying for 5 years or something like that, you don't necessarily need to change everything, close all your US accounts, get a new will, all of that. Kind of depends on how long you plan on staying abroad. So, but
Exactly.
who
Yeah. And
knows? That's the thing.
yeah,
Is like,
exactly. It'll depend on the country, it'll depend on the rules. But another thing I learned too was I don't know if they do this in Europe as much as Latin America. I think it's interesting to have this conversation in contrast because I'm curious.
mhm.
One of the biggest things that we noticed in Costa Rica was they are so specific about identifying the source of your money. So if you bring money down and you want to put it in a bank account, I had an experience at a Costa Rican bank where we brought cash with us because we figured that's the best way to deposit money is let's bring cash, bring it to a bank. Shame on us. That was like the worst thing we could have done. The bank was like, put that away. I'm going to pretend I didn't see that.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
how dare you bring cash into the bank? And I was like, it's a bank. And then I realized where I was in the world. And here's one thing you have to realize they assume everything is Breaking Bad, they assume everything is drug money
Wait, it's not.
because, right, because typically the product moves north, the money moves south. So if you see people moving south with lots of cash, they immediately assume, and they have a money laundering policing force, right? Which makes sense because it's like this is a problem here, right? This is between, Latin America and the US, Mexico, all of that. So they actually see it so prominently that they're on the sort of route that they said, hey, any money that comes into a bank account or any money that's used for a major real estate transaction, they have to do this thing called know your customer. And they basically audit where the money came from and they need to see when the money was deposited in your US bank account and for what reason. So, like, was it because you worked, you were an employee? Show us your tax returns, show us your bank statements, show us that you make this much money, show me like your job letter. And I was like, wow, this is like worse than a mortgage application just to make a deposit in a bank account. And then you realize the why behind it and you go, oh, okay. Like, I'm playing in a different game here. I got to learn the rules.
Yeah, I've not seen the same happening in Europe necessarily.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's insane though. I can't imagine going to a bank
I
and them being like, "Put your money away." I would be scared. I'd be like, "Did I do something wrong?" Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
we were a little bit, we were like, huh? And then we kind of, oh, okay. And it's not because there's any real danger here. It was just more like when you think about it, the rules are made around the most common channels that criminals get in, right? Or like the most common crimes that take place. So in this
Mhm.
case, they're really big on anti-money laundering, whereas the US might be really big on other sorts of crimes, right? In terms of how they're enforcing them. So money laundering and drug trade is really policed here, which rightfully so. So then what they do is they just kind of require everybody to have an additional layer of vetting. And I say, good on you. That's great. But we're not used to that. So we're kind of going like, it's my money. Like I brought it. Why do you need to see more information? I made this money
Mhm.
from employment. And they're like, can you validate that? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've never been asked these questions before. And then you just realize you're playing a different game. And it's an interesting process to go through. It's humbling because you go, okay, I am, you know, subject to whatever you say I need to do. I don't get to fight you on this. Like, it's your rules, not mine.
Hmm. Yeah, for
So
sure.
it was interesting to go through that process and to be challenged in that way. But now we have that expectation. Now, if we get into real estate transactions, we're like, give ourselves a couple days for the know your customer thing to process, to like audit us and make sure that we're legitimate. Uh, it's helpful to know. And I think that, you don't get I mean, you know this, Savannah, we don't get like a pamphlet when we arrive saying like, here's everything you need to know. Like, here's the brochure of moving to Austria, moving to Germany, moving to Costa Rica. Like, here are the need to know FAQs. I mean, I would have loved that. I think that we have tons of blogs we read, but like in the real moment, you go, oh, this is what they're talking about. Okay. And
Yeah.
there's a lot to learn, right?
So we should create a moving to X country for dummies book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. I find it so interesting. Did you have your own experience with something like that with Germany or Austria where you're like, oh, this is a different rule? Okay.
Something I was definitely surprised with is in Switzerland, they have wealth tax. So they basically charge a percentage tax on your overall wealth, and that's regardless of where it is in the world. So if you like move to Switzerland per se and you have a bunch of assets in the US, like whether that be property or retirement accounts or anything like that, they actually tax that amount. And what kind of sucks for US taxpayers is it's a wealth tax, not an income tax. So I mentioned earlier that there's like two tax benefits, and one of those is the foreign tax credit. And that's when you pay income tax in a foreign country, you claim a credit on your tax return to reduce your US tax. So you're not double taxed. But wealth tax
Right.
isn't an income tax. So you can't actually claim it on the US side. So it's basically this tax you're paying to
Oh,
Switzerland that you can't use on your US return. And it's just kind of the tax you have to pay. So I was kind of surprised by
okay.
that one.
At the risk of going down a rabbit hole with that, when they define wealth, are we talking like unrealized gain, meaning like the value of your investments subjectively? Or are we talking about like cash in the bank, your overall properties, how far do they go with that when they measure wealth? Like, how do they define that?
That's where it's a bit complex because it kind of depends on the type of account, whether it's like a taxable brokerage account is treated different than a Roth IRA or a traditional IRA account. So, yeah, I mean, that is a bit of a rabbit hole to dive down. So,
Yeah.
it kind of really
Oh,
depends on
I'll
the type of
episode on that
accounts.
maybe later with the
Yeah.
wealth tax.
And there are like a bunch of different countries who charge wealth tax and it's all done differently in each country. So, yeah, it's a bit of a complex one, but that's something I was personally surprised about. Luckily, they don't do that where I live, which is nice, but yeah.
That is really interesting. Yeah. So we mentioned the foreign tax credit, and I wanted to ask you this next. Let's talk about the benefits of why. Like, first of all, I don't advocate anybody make a life-altering decision in the name of taxes. Like, I would never want anyone to move to a different country solely for the tax benefits of something. It has to be a joy play, as I put it, not a
Mhm.
tax play. And then secondarily, figure out if the taxes make sense, right? So let's talk about the benefits of moving abroad for our US citizens listening and just unpack for them like, here's what you can expect in terms of like tax credit, the exclusion, what is the difference? How do you actually navigate that?
Yeah, so the first one is the foreign earned income exclusion. So this is basically available to taxpayers living abroad. There's two different kind of ways you qualify it for it. That's one, if you're considered a bona fide resident. So that's if you're registered in the foreign country, it's your main residence. You rent you property there. You're registered to pay tax there. You can claim or you can kind of qualify for that test. And the other one is the physical presence test. So that is 335 days, I believe, out of 365 in the foreign country. So those are kind of the two ways you qualify for it. And then what that does is it allows you to just exclude X amount of money, which is kind of indexed each year from taxation. And for 2024, that amount, I believe, is 126,500. So what that means is the first 126,500 of your earned income, let me specify, it's only earned income, it would just be excluded from taxation. So it doesn't apply to
Interesting.
any investment income. So if you have interest, dividends, capital gains, pension income,
Right.
whatever it may be, it doesn't apply for this exclusion. So
Gotcha. So let's talk about that. There are the two tests, right? Do you have to meet one or both of them?
just one. So just one of the
One
tests.
of so bona fide residency. Meaning you don't have to be a resident on paper, be declared a resident or a citizen of the other country. You could
Opposite.
achieve both res-
Bona fide resident is where you need to be basically assigned a resident of the foreign country. So that's, you need to be
Okay,
registered to work there, paying taxes there, whatever it may be, like have your permanent residence there. There's a bunch of different factors kind of that play into whether or not you're considered a bona fide resident. And the other one is the physical presence test, and that's just how long basically you're there, how long you're abroad. Um, and
right,
people who
right.
are
And
work.
is
Go ahead.
that when you said it's 335 days of 365, is that only calendar year or over any 365-day period?
Any 365-day period. So you can kind of play with the
Got it.
numbers a bit. And we see this, it's a bit of a planning opportunity. So um, a lot of people don't qualify for Roth IRA contributions or traditional IRA contributions because they use the foreign earned income exclusion, and then that leads their earned income to zero, which may mean that you can't contribute to one of these plans. So that's where you can actually use the physical presence test and play with the dates a little bit to leave some earned income in the pot, which then allows you to make those contributions. So yes, you can move the days around with the physical presence test, so it doesn't have to be January 1 to December 31st of the same year.
Got it. Oh, that's interesting. And how would
Yeah.
they, I mean, my brain goes right to how would they audit that?
Yes, that is a bit difficult. I mean, I always have the same questions, right? There's no easy answer there. If they were to audit you, you would have to prove it, right? Um,
Right.
for clients who are green card holders, like they usually receive an I-94, so that's a little bit easier to audit, and that usually just shows their entrance and exit dates of the US. So, but yeah, I don't know. It's not like they receive when you buy flights to the IRS. So, yeah,
Right.
no easy
Yeah,
answer there,
that's
I
interesting.
guess.
Yeah, I guess the passport stamps would be good proof to show,
Mm.
but like there have been times, I'm not gonna lie, where I haven't gotten a stamp. So it's also tricky because it's been like back and forth. And I think that's really interesting, though, the bona fide residency, because we're pursuing residency, but we have a company here, we pay taxes here, we have a home here, we have an address here. So although we're not declared as residents, or it's in process with the application, we are, we don't meet the physical presence test quite yet, but because we're kind of like half and half, off and
Mhm.
on, off and on. And I don't think we've met that test yet. So it's funny because we're still kind of in that limbo, right? Of everything's in the US, but we do have money here, we do have a life here. And that's what makes it super complicated too, is it's almost like not double taxation, obviously, because you mentioned that, but we have almost like double the maintenance to do in terms of we have our responsibilities in both locations, which makes it a little trickier.
Yeah, it also depends kind of what your connections still are in the US, right? Like if you still own
Yeah.
property in the US, if you're still registered in the state, still paying like state taxes, like that's it all becomes a
Hmm.
little bit complex. So so yeah,
Yeah.
got to look into the kind of requirements for the bona fide residence test and just see if you meet them, I guess.
Yeah. And the U.S. tax system is hard enough with 50 states and 50 different state tax laws, and it must be like that in Europe too, with so many different countries, different tax agencies, and different ways you can earn income. Excuse me. Do you find that your clients, especially while you're in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, when your clients are based there, that they're also earning income from other countries in Europe, or that they're traveling to those other countries and actually encountering these exact same issues?
Um, yes, you have to be really careful about where kind of you're traveling and working in like within Europe and talk to local people to figure out what like the local tax requirements may be because if you travel around too much, you could kind of trigger a tax filing requirement in another country as well. So yeah, it all becomes a bit complex. And whether or not you're actually legally able to work in different countries can also depend on like what's your visa status? Do you have citizenship in Europe? Like where are you actually able to work? Um, yeah, we see a lot of digital nomads, people who just want to like travel around and work in a bunch of different places. And that, I don't know, it can be a little bit complex. Like you need to be really careful kind of how long you're staying in each country, seeing if you're triggering a local filing requirement as well. But that's again
Yeah, that's
different for
actually.
each country. So can become difficult.
It's almost like states too. It's just a little bit higher. I feel like it's just higher stakes, but like it's a lot like the US states where depending on how long you're there, they might try to claim that you're earning income there and get their claim on it. But they have completely different rules about what is considered earned income or what is taxed, or that's nutty. But on the digital nomad front, let's talk about that. Would you encourage, discourage, or maybe encourage with a little asterisk, somebody pursue something like that? Because I know that's really popular right now in terms of traveling. Would you say, yes, but here's where to caution you, basically?
I mean, it's a great lifestyle, right? Being able to travel around and work and live in different countries. I would say
Yeah.
where the caution really would be is if you're going to stay in a foreign country for like more than a few months working there, you can really trigger residency requirements. So it's just important as you're traveling around to the different countries, figure out what are the requirements for paying taxes. Is that like an income threshold that you earn while you're living there, or a time period that you earn while you're living there? And also, are you legally allowed to be there too? That's another point, because a lot of digital nomads, okay, say you're like a US citizen, you're looking to travel around and study in Europe or work around Europe. What visa really allows you to do that? Because when you move to Europe, you're in the Schengen zone, so you have 90 days to travel for free. But beyond that, you'll need a visa to be able to stay, live, and work and travel around. So that can be a little
Yeah.
complex because there's not really like a digital nomad visa, unfortunately, available. So
And what's
yeah.
wild? We have that. So
Oh wait,
during
really?
COVID, Costa Rica enacted a digital nomad residency qualification. So
Hmm.
we have this thing where you can get residency for being a rentista, which is you make a certain amount of money or you pay a certain amount in rent. I forget what that is. We're not doing that one. There's an investor one where you invest a certain amount in property in the country. There's a pensionado, which is if you're retired or if you're like ex-military, there are certain requirements to say, yeah, I'm a pensionado and I'm moving here and I want to pursue residency. And then they added a fourth one, which is digital nomad during COVID. They
Oh
actually
well.
wanted to attract more people from America, Canada. They wanted to attract more people from other countries to say, live and work here. Enjoy what Costa Rica has to offer. We have great internet down here because their main industry was tourism.
Hmm.
And that started to suffer during COVID. So they started opening up more ability for people to come down and, in fact, incentivized it. So that was a really interesting move because they literally changed their requirements and the residency process to make it easier for people to come down and work here, which I thought was really interesting. It's all about the incentives and the strategies of the country and what they want to have happen and how they approach those situations, right? And that was just a really interesting switch that they made. And now they really do encourage it here.
That's interesting. I'd be curious, number one, how long the visa is, and two, what are the tax requirements as well? I don't know, just me being curious, but
Yeah, right. We gotta nerd out on this in a bit. But actually, yeah, when we come down here, we have 180-day visas,
oh,
180-day
okay.
tourist.
And can you
Yeah,
come like
which
every
is
year? So you can just go every year, live for 180 days, or
you can live for 180 days every time you land in the Liberia airport. So like we land and it's a 180-day stamp. We go back to the States for a week, we come back 180-day stamp. So every time
oh
you
wow.
arrive, you can stay for 6 months. This is why everybody stays.
Yeah, that's
Because
really
you
easy.
right?
That's
That's also
insane.
why we haven't had any issues because it's very, very seldom that my husband and I stay for 6 whole months unbroken. Typically, we will go back to the States in the course of a 6 month period. We want to go get Amazon Prime orders. Like, we need to go back and get, like, we'll go get a few provisions from home. We'll go check on things, and we do split our time, and he and I both will go at different points in time to back to the States, and stay for prolonged periods. So like we're always hitting that reset button, and it's just really interesting because there's a driving limit. Like you can be driving your car for like 90 days, I think, and then 180 to stay. So it's
Hmm.
weird because it's like technically my license is invalid after 90 days, but I can stay here. So
Oh,
it's very strange. You have to know that's another thing too, like driver's licenses, all that stuff. Like it's so complicated, but it's also like so easy when you have a really good community of people. If you can find other expats who have done it, such great resources to be able to relate to. Do you agree? Have you been able to find that in Europe?
yeah, I found that in every country I live in, there's always different like Facebook groups is usually the way we've done it, but like there's Americans
Yeah.
abroad as well. But yeah, just random different Facebook groups is really how I've stayed in touch with a lot of yeah, US expats in the same situation. But I feel like it was really hard to find information tax wise. Like that's kind of how I ended up diving into this and starting my own company and stuff like that too. Is like I just don't like leaving questions unanswered. So I just like research and research and research until I kind of find the answers. But yeah, that's why I realized there's just like endless questions, kind of, especially when it comes to like
Yeah,
all of the foreign stuff. Like each country has like their own like pension schemes, type of investments, blah blah blah. That can become really difficult.
totally. Uh, and do you recommend any other resources, whether they be others or your own, that people could utilize, if they're considering moving abroad or they're considering a move like this and they just want to be smart about making that decision? They want to take a little bit of a pause before they buy the plane ticket and say, is this where I want to be? What do you recommend they do, or who should they seek out?
Yeah. So, I mean, first and foremost is I would say researching the country where you're kind of looking to go, seeing if it kind of fits with your lifestyle that you're looking into, like what the cost of living would be, job opportunities, and stuff like that. Unfortunately, there's no like mass resource out there that has everything laid out perfectly for you, right? So it's really something you kind of got to look at like piece by piece, country by country. And then once you've kind of settled on a country and have a target in mind, is researching people kind of who might be able to help you there. So whether that's like a financial planner or I don't know, like a relocation expert or whoever really that might be. That's what I found the best. Like I mentioned, Facebook groups, connecting with like fellow expats who have already gone through the process. But there's no really like mass resource of information, unfortunately, out there. So maybe it's coming in the future, but that's kind of what we're working towards as well, is like helping kind of educate people around that because it's, I don't know, I struggled through it. So I know there's a lot of people struggling through it. So yeah.
100%. Do you have any resources or any place you can point our listeners to if they want to get more help from you?
Yeah, so we have website passwordwealth.com, or you can check us out. We have Spotify, Apple Music, all of that for our podcast. And then, yeah, on our website, we also kind of do one-on-one coaching at an hourly rate. So, yeah,
Awesome. Thank you, Savannah, so much for all your knowledge. I think this is so much fun to hear from somebody else who's moved outside the US, another tax pro at that, and can shed some light on this is what you guys should be thinking about, this is what you may not know. And guys, don't fear what you don't know. Like, I didn't know a whole lot coming down to Costa Rica. I didn't wait till I learned everything to buy the plane ticket. Neither did Savannah. Do we wish we learned a smidgen more before we left? Probably. But I wouldn't have changed a single thing about how things went. I don't know about you, but I think it worked out exactly the way it should, and I would encourage anybody to explore the same thing.
definitely. It's doable. Don't be scared. I mean, be a little scared, right? But just ask
That's
questions
kind
would
of
be
fun
my
of
biggest thing.
this.
Yeah, and then also like I always just tell people like don't be afraid to grind, be a little bit gritty is really important when you're making a move like this. It's not everything's not going to fall into place perfectly, but don't be scared of the unknown. So, yeah, it's
Yeah,
doable.
I completely agree. And if you take nothing else away from this episode, take that away. Savannah, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.